Many people would say that OT environments are fundamentally different than IT. Is that true? Let's find out. Welcome to Threat Talks. My name is Lieuwe Koning, and here from the Security Operations Center at Ontoit, we bring you the next episode titled Zero Trust on the Factory Floor. Let's get on to it. Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity. Let's introduce our guest of today. He is a regular guest. His name is Rob Maas, Field CTO of Ontoit, and his job is to make sure that all our customers' environments are safe. That's a big job, Rob. Welcome. Good to have you back. We're going to talk about OT and IT environments. You talk to customers a lot, and customers that have IT environments and that have OT environments, and especially it's in our view fun to talk about the differences or how they talk together, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Can you explain first of all? OT has used to be really on its own, like separated, etc. But that changed fundamentally, over the last years or decade.
It's already going on for several years, maybe even longer than that. But we see a real trend now, especially in, for example, maintenance intervals. How many cycles did a motor run, or kind of a robot arm? How many movements did it make, and when do we need to refresh oil, for example? That was already going on. And what we see now also is that we see machine learning and AI to improve the processes. So they also integrated with the OT systems to see, okay, can we make this robot movement even more efficient? And where are the things that we can improve? So we see more and more OT being, interconnected with IT.
Interconnected, or maybe even IT-like.
Yeah, it goes towards them. I think both have their own requirements, and that's what we will discuss today. But indeed, OT is heading more towards IT than IT is going towards OT.
Yeah, because in the old days, it was just like a few signals for a pump or for a crane or so, and it's a remote control that needs to control something. For example,
you really had to go.
No telemetry.
Yeah, it was really you needed physical access to control the OT environment, and that started. First, we got the remote desktops. And now we see that also the telemetry and controls are really going way more to IT.
Yeah, you need physical access. Is great for cybersecurity, right? I mean, air gap networks are a very, very effective measure, but that is fading away.
Yeah, but it's still something that's in the cultural, especially for OT people that control those environments. They're still really thinking often, and it is really a separate environment, completely different than IT, and that's partly done on how it used to be.
Yeah, and there's many controls that in IT that we know that don't really work. The most obvious example probably is patching. And we always, even in IT, talk about the CIA triad, where availability always wins, always. In
IT, we get schedules that we can do our maintenance. In OT, that's much, much harder, if possible at all.
Yeah. If there is a patch in the first place.
That's the other one indeed. A lot of things, there is no patch, really hard to install, or with a lot of risk. So if that patching breaks, then you need to buy a new PLC or component, whatever was associated with it. So patching is not a thing that's easy to do in OT environments.
But very common for IT.
It's very common, yeah.
It's
often even a compliance check mark. Hey, we need to have a patch process and everything that comes with it.
When I think of OT these days, I think of we have a couple of initiatives that we have done. We had Hack the Boat a while ago, where we made a ship like a real ship, but smaller, because otherwise it wouldn't fit in a bathtub for demonstration purposes. But the actual control mechanisms are real, so we use that, and then we show how easy it's striking how easy it is. How simply
even
you
with
can...
ships, so there are it was already the case that a ship is, at least the larger ones, is kind of a data center in on its own, but it used to be separate, so running on the sea or ocean, wherever it was. But even there, you see that it's get more and more interconnected. So they use satellites, for example, or other links to get the data across and to know, okay, if the ship enters this harbor, then we need to really do some maintenance on module X, Y, or Z. So even there, you see that connectivity gets more and more towards IT.
More risk. So how and have the OT people? So we are all used to IT environments. for those companies who have OT as well, they manage that as well. But typically, we see that's a different place in the organizational structure.
Yeah.
Eh?
So
what do you see in practice?
In practice, still, I would say 99% of the companies have really strict departments. So one department OT, one department IT, which are rarely talk to each other, and also with their own. What else is already mentioned is the cultural background from where they're coming from, and that's a really challenge that we see nowadays when OT and IT are converging more and more.
Yeah, because OT kind of has to go through the same trouble as the IT has gone through in the past 1.5 decade or so, where everything becomes more interconnected. All those new cybersecurity countermeasures appear and have to be implemented, etc. And OT wasn't really incentivized much, probably, to do so.
So for OT, at least in most cases, availability is the thing. It should always work and always keep on running. And we had for years the Purdue model, where OT was separated, but it was separated per OT function. So the PLC was separated from the human-machine interfaces. And those you have all these layers, but that's on the functional level of an asset. All PLCs should belong together, all HMI should belong together. And then on the top layers, you had the IT systems, like the DMZ and the servers.
Yeah, we'll put a picture of the Purdue model in the
show notes.
In the show notes, indeed. Yeah. So once again, so who made that?
The Purdue model is already quite old, and it was really horizontal layers. So really on the type of component that you want to protect. But there was no. It was just okay. We have all the PLCs, we put them together. We have all the HMIs, we put them together. And then you already see kind of a segregation here between IT, because the top layers were really IT components and often not managed by the OT personnel themselves. So it's part of the Purdue model, but the Purdue model said, okay, the lower layers are OT and the two highest one are IT. So maybe it introduced already a bit of the gap or the wall between those teams we see
the
today.
Thinking in layers is there.
Yeah, and we used to do the same with IT. We used to think, okay, we have a LAN and we have a DMZ, which is of course what we learned already.
I would say a few episodes of Thread Talks about this whole thing about how DMZs don't work.
Okay, exactly. You should not do that. But for OT, it's a little bit different, because we really in IT we're often protecting the data. The data is most of the times the thing that we want to protect. In OT, it's the device and the availability again. So the layers make sense, but it doesn't make sense to have PLCs that go with your building management system, for example, together with your production line. There should be also a vertical segmentation, and that looks like a zero trust. So you can make what we call in zero trust protect surfaces. You can do the same in OT by making vertical layers as well on the Purdue model. So put everything that belongs, for example, to the building management system in one vertical layer, what we call a protect surface, but still keep also the horizontal layers to protect the devices.
Yeah, so because if you only apply the Purdue model, then what it means is that all OT systems share each layer. So yes, they are in a way layered, but they're in the end all in the same environment, and therefore lateral movement, as we are very aware of in IT.
If I was able to see let's make it very simple. Let's say everything was Ethernet. I see an HVAC system, so the air conditioning with a UTP cable. I can probably just put in my laptop and see what's around there. And then if there is no proper segmentation, so no proper zero trust, I will see all the PLCs that are associated, at least with that network. And then the risk is that most of those systems are very vulnerable in a sense, especially for malicious traffic, DOS attacks, and they will easily cripple or even break or go down at all. And that's what we really want to avoid in OT, because we said availability is the most important thing.
Yeah, and therefore you need to, if there's one, say the building management system, the management system of that in the IT layer of the Purdue model should only have access on the network level already to those pieces of equipment that apply to that system, and not to anything else. So in the Purdue model, you carve out vertical.
And that's exactly the same as we do zero trust in IT. So it's for the IT people, this should be a very familiar way of thinking. And for OT, it might be a relatively new way of thinking.
Maybe you should write a blog post about this.
I already did. So it probably will also show up in the show notes where we explain why this is really
where you have a diagram
necessity.
where the Purdue model is like virtually segmented, but then we also horizontally based on what we call protect surface, and that simply should be applied to OT as well. How big is the understanding? You mentioned in the beginning a little about those departments aren't really talking. Why is that, you think? Is that?
Yeah, I think it's from the early days. So OT was separated, physical access and IT quickly became
it's the
connected.
plant.
Yeah, it's really the plant.
Head office.
Yes, often a different place or a different building. And IT indeed is the head office, and IT is already connected, I think, since the early 90s that we get more and more used to having interconnected system networks, and also the internet came, of course, a bit later, but everything was connected. So IT is really used to, okay, everything is connected, and quickly found out, unfortunately, that they really need to do some segmentation to prevent that lateral movement. So we have years of experience with all kinds of problems that we had. Ransomware is maybe the biggest one that everyone knows, but that's merely because we didn't do proper segmentation. And now with OT, we're heading in the same direction because we are going to connect everything. But we haven't learned in OT yet to apply the same principles that we have learned in IT. So we can really learn in OT from IT when it comes to...
but I can imagine, and if you say I'm an OT person, I go to IT, say, hey, listen, what do you do in protecting your systems? Because I might have the same issue. And then it's, there's patch management, and we need to put the firewall in and endpoint protection. And they're like, this is not my game.
That's the biggest challenge. So what IT people often don't understand or don't see or are not familiar with, whatever the reason is that for OT people, quite often availability is the key thing. So changes are hard, patching is hard, every change is hard. That's in essence what's happening. That's one way. And the other way is also OT needs to understand how IT works. So the segmentation can also be a very good preventive measure. So we can really learn from each other what IT has learned and how to apply it in OT. But it is a different approach because patching will often not work for most equipment, but segmentation will.
So you rely even more on other things like segmentation.
Exactly.
How does it work in practice? I mean, if there's the lowest layer in the Purdue model where all the devices are then connected, there is some kind of a network infrastructure typically, or radio, like Wi-Fi or similar. Should they make like VLANs there? Is that?
It depends a bit on the protocol, but all the networks can be segmented. Sometimes it requires some extra equipment, and there you need to be, I would say, very smart, like we do with IT as well. So define what you want to protect. So define your protect services. Just the first step of zero trust. Define what we want to protect, and if you're clever, then you say, okay, maybe this is we have the building management system that is not as critical as the production line. So what an outcome could be is that you say, okay, the production line, we leave it as B, and then we go.
So your core production, your machines that make your paint or carve the wood or whatever your factory is doing. Yep. That's what you mean. The core business.
The really core business, the core business process. We leave it as it is. And then we maybe going to change the building management system because the impact, if it goes sideways, is really, compared to the critical process, is not that severe. So we can...
You take all lesser critical systems, treat them separately, and then in the end, only one
that's one way to approach it, because you're holding down your production line because you need to renumber systems. It's very expensive, and it's really hard to create a schedule for it. But from others, you might be...
take out the threads out of that big...
Yeah, and for other segments like your HVAC, your building management system. Well, of course, it's a pity if the airco doesn't work, if it is really warm. But the production line...
It's fine for an hour.
Yeah, exactly. So you have some time to fix it, and it's easier to plan that, so you can maybe schedule it when everyone is at home. So,
but this is something that happens all the time in IT when you're applying zero trust. So that's where big similarities and where IT can really help. Okay. All right. Do you have some recommendations to those organizations who have both IT and OT? What should you and if you recognize these problems, what would you do?
Yeah, the first thing, and that's not technical, is really make sure that
non-technical solution from the field CTO. Great.
Make sure they understand each other. So get some coffee together, communicate, and just exchange your experiences in the field, and make sure that you know how to reach each other, or maybe even convert it one day to one team. But at least that's the most important thing.
Convert into one team. That's interesting because typically, so the CIO owns the internal IT department. Typically, those who control the OT reports to the plants and may even be geographically. So that
might be a
quite a
challenge.
change.
But you need to find a way to remove the wall that's between those teams, and that you can really learn from those teams.
Clear.
And what you will see more and more is that the OT team will need IT team for secure access. It's a bit of it would be a shame if they need to reinvent the wheel on their own, how to provide secure access to some of their systems. So really work together. It will save you a lot. And there's a lot of experience in the IT team.
Great.
So that would be the first step. And then once you know each other, then start building a plan. Okay, this is the OT that we have. And these are what we call often the crown jewels. So the critical business processes, and define them. And then once you have defined these protect services, then you can start with a plan. Okay, this is where we start with the implementation.
Yeah, but don't focus on trying to patch all the time, etc. So what you're saying, I think, is OT guys can go to the IT and then cherry pick the things that work for them and the experiences, and then apply that in their environment, and ideally become one big team that does both.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Very insightful. And to our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this, please reward us with a like. We'd appreciate that. It allows us to spread the word further. And if you press the subscribe button, which is very close to the like button, you will find the next episode of Threat Talks in your inbox as well. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Onto It Cybersecurity and M6. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.